Welcome to My Spoonie Sisters, featuring stories from special guests dedicated to empowering those with chronic illness. Our goal? To connect people and provide the support and tools they need to live a better life. For those with chronic illness, our energy levels just fade faster. We must be more purposeful with the spoons allotted to us. So grab your coffee or tea, sister, and tune in as My Spoonie Sisters share stories of living with chronic illness.
Hi, my Spoonie Sisters. I'm Gracefully Jen, and I am so excited to bring LJ Johnson to the house. So, hi, LJ.
Hey, girl. Hey, what's up?
Not a lot. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I mean, it's hot. Like I told you, it's probably already like 109 degrees, but we're ready to burn, baby. We're ready to roast. We're living our best life over here. Hot girl summer for sure.
I love it. Okay, what would you like to share with our listeners today about yourself?
Oh my gosh, where do I start, right? I specialize in endometriosis, PCOS, and fibroids. I love the Spoonies, right? I'm a Spoonie. I'm an endo warrior. Took me 16 years to get my own diagnosis of endometriosis, which is why I'm here, right? To talk a little bit about endo, to debunk some of those misconceptions, to answer questions, just to really spread awareness. I remember when I got diagnosed, I didn't have the support system, right? I didn't have Instagram and Twitter and Pinterest and all these amazing Spoonie communities. It was just kind of like me with the girl that felt like she had a broken body, a broken uterus, the murder scene periods. And I was just hating life and everything around it, right? And definitely wasn't loving my doctors. And not that they were bad people, they just weren't giving me the answers I needed to regain my quality of life.
And that's the answer right there. The doctors are not always giving the answers we need. And that's
Correct.
why this community is so valuable. So what does your diagnosis story look like?
Oh my gosh. So my diagnosis story, let's talk about your girl is 43, just turned 43 in May. So 43 years old, I started having endometriosis issues at the age of 14. My period started at 12. I'll never forget. My dad came home and was like, welcome to motherhood, welcome to womanhood. And I'm like, here I am. Right. That was all fine and cool till I hit 14. And I was like, ooh, is this what womanhood looks like? The cramping, the bleeding, the everything. I mean, my cycle, I think started like most people, right? Kind of irregular. Just kind of there, no big deal. But at the age of 14 years old, it rocked my world. Like it turned my world upside down. The painful periods, it wasn't just cramping. It was like, doubled over cramping. I couldn't walk. It was multiple accidents at school. My mother, telling me once again how to put a pad in. And I'm like, I'm doing all the things. Like I really am doing all the things. Multiple accidents. It was flaring up my asthma, chronic systemic inflammation. I remember just simple things like, other people would have their period and, I'm dating myself, right? And they would just walk the bleachers, right? Versus me, when my cycle came, like I couldn't crawl, like I could barely walk, right? I couldn't walk. I couldn't run. I was passing out, having hot flashes. I mean, let's talk about hot flashes at the age of 14. Your body's already being weird. You feel weird. And then you're like, I'm sweating out of every pore in my body, but nobody else seems to be having this issue. You're like, is there something wrong with me? It was horrible. I have to be honest. I mean, and I remember just as a Black woman, I remember going to my mother and she gave me this speech that I'm a strong Black woman and basically that I didn't feel pain. And I'm like, that's kind of weird because I definitely am feeling something. And I'm also a PK, right? So PK as in pastor's kid. So they're kind of like, you know what? Drink some water, pray about it and come back to us. And I'm like, I'm coming back to you because there's something going on. The water and the prayer, I think there's power in water and power in prayer. Let me tell you, but I needed a little bit more than go sit down somewhere and drink some water, right? That cure all, kind of like some families are like, rub some Vicks Vapor Rub on it. Like I had tried all those things. I had a situation. So luckily for me, I graduated high school at the age of 15. And so I kind of was the boss of me at that time, right? So I was in college. I know, right? I was in college and I was able to kind of take over my medical care, right? So instead of just complaining to my mother, right, the oldest of 4 children, it's kind of like, okay, we don't have time for you to be complaining. You're the oldest. You've got to be an example. I was that type A person, the person that didn't make a C. I didn't make a C on anything, right, until my master's program, right? So I'm talking about all A's 24/7, very consistent. And so it was really a big deal for me to get the diagnosis, but it was a lot of hard work, right? It was the girl that was coming in that was talking about period pain, that was talking about this, that, and the other. And people, as soon as they heard period pain or pelvic pain, they're like, you know what? I got just the birth control for you. We just had some samples come in, right? So that was the beginning of my journey, right? Just feeling like my body was letting me down. And it wasn't just period pain, right? It wasn't just the cramping. It wasn't just some of those other things. It was my entire body was inflamed, right? Like I didn't know what to do. I mean, one second it would be ankle pain. The next second it was like this shooting back pain. The other second I was cramping outside of my cycle. So yeah, that's kind of where my cycle and my story with endometriosis started. But the other thing is I feel like we should pause here and maybe define endometriosis, right? Because everyone's diagnosis looks a little bit different.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Absolutely. All right. So let's get into it. So sometimes I get a little sassy about this, but I need everyone to hear it, especially the people in the back, right? So endometriosis is not uterine lining. I know right there. You're probably like, oh my God, I know I'm coming at you with love, right? With a small spanking, but with love, right? So endometriosis, I'm going to say this 3 times for the people in the back, is uterine-like tissue found outside of the uterus. I'm going to say it again. Uterine-like tissue found outside of the uterus, right? It is hormonally driven. It is systemic chronic inflammation throughout your entire body. It is not just period pain, right? It is not just cramping. It is not a reproductive disorder. And if that's not enough, let me put icing on the cake that it has autoimmune-like factors. So that is a very, very big thing. So circling back once again, endometriosis is uterine-like tissue found outside of the uterus. It is hormonally driven. It is chronic systemic inflammation throughout your entire body. It is not a reproductive disorder, right? It's not a disease of your uterus. It's not retrograde period or any of those things. And then to just make it even more amazing, the autoimmune-like factors is just really like for a lot of people and for myself, that is where I deal with a lot of the endometriosis issues. When I first started, I had a lot of the period pain and this, that, and the other. But now moving forward, as I've gotten older, it's more the chronic systemic inflammation that's causing a lot of autoimmune issues.
Wow.
Right. I know, right?
That's so much for people to take in if they're not familiar with it. And, honestly, so I had endometriosis also growing up, and I had no idea what was going on with my body. And it was not until my 20s that I saw a doctor and they wanted to start figuring out what my pain was coming from.
Right.
And it was described to me as gum growing outside of my uterus.
Okay.
That was the description I got. And I was like, okay, that sounds terrible.
Right? Because gum is sticky, right? And that's interesting. I've never heard that, but this is the thing. It is outside of your uterus. And unfortunately, it can touch your bowel, touch your ovaries. It can start literally locking things together. Never heard that, but I'm like, it does sound horrible. And it is horrible, honey. Let me tell you, right? Let me tell you.
Yeah. So were you familiar with the term Spoonie as you started diving into finding out what was going on with you?
Absolutely not. So I have to be honest, like I said, I didn't have that support system. I mean, as I date myself, I was that person on Baby Center because I was a mother, a young mom, with young children on Baby Center in the forums, asking other people like, hey, are you passing out during your period? Like, is it gotten better? Because I was told, right? Going back to the misconceptions, I was told, just have a baby, just get pregnant. It'll balance your hormones out and stretch everything out. Right. So I remember I had 2 children. Right. So luckily for me, I didn't have a fertility journey or any challenges with endometriosis, but I was 2 kids deep. And so I remember going to the doctor and being like, okay, do I need a basketball team? Like, am I having a kid every couple of years? Like, what's going on here? Because I was told have a baby, it'll cure your endo. So I'm like, I did that, right? I tried the birth control. It didn't cure my endo. So the Spoonie term, I really didn't, I don't think it probably trended till maybe like 10 years ago, right? Like as I was going through my journey, it was very isolated, right? I was kind of the person that would commit to going to outings. I would be hosting stuff at my home and I'd be the person, 2 hours before talking about, hey, I can't make it, this, that, and the other. Oh, I was going to host, but I can't, I can't get out of bed. I was that person, real talk, texting and calling my neighbors to have them come to my home to get my children dressed because I couldn't, get down the stairs to get them dressed. Right. I slept on the couch a lot of the time, not because the couch was amazing, because I couldn't get up the stairs to get to my own bed. So I love that the term is more well circulated now. Everyone, and some people don't even probably even understand what it is. They're just like Spoonie, someone that's chronically ill, or sometimes they're just like Spoonie is somebody that's being a hypochondriac and just exasperating, and being super dramatic. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I hear it all the time. People saying, oh, no. That's just someone being dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
They even refer to it as being fibromyalgia, and fibromyalgia, they claim is the answer to whatever they can't figure out is wrong with you.
Right. As soon as they don't know, they have to give you a blanket term, right? Joint pain, it's fibromyalgia, bowel, must be IBS, right? And I remember like IBS is literally BS, right? Because they don't know what's going on, right? So they're just like, oh, something going on with your gut health. And that one prescription we tried didn't cure it. Now it must be IBS, and it's like, okay, now what do I do? Right? Give me some solutions.
Well, and I think they leave out the fact that, okay, we give you this one medication to treat whatever it is we're trying to treat, but now it's going to cause this. So now you need this medication to treat this. And now that's going to cause this over here. And it's just this vicious cycle. And before you know it, if you're listening to the doctor 100% of the time, you're on 13 different medications.
Absolutely. And that was me. I mean, that was me for years. Even once I started getting into more functional medicine and turning my life around, it's natural health healing takes time, right? Same way pharmaceuticals, right? But a pharmaceutical will get in there a little bit quicker. You can take a Z-Pack and start feeling better 48 hours later, right? Doing the natural way, it's going to take a little bit longer. And so I know for me, I was trying to transition off the medications, but like you said, taking the birth control, had messed up my gut microbiome, right? Then I was having extreme constipation. Then there was the estrogen dominance, like everything was. So it's like everything I was doing, one medication was 4 side effects, right? Which needed another medication, right? I was doing the birth control, which I'm sassy, God knows what, right? I didn't need anything to make me more sassy, but that birth control pushed me over the limit. But then when I came off of it, there was a lot of anxiety and depression. So it's like, oh, we got a pill for that. So it was honestly like 1 pill equal 3 equal 4. I mean, at some points I was on maybe 13 medications and I honestly needed all of them, right? Like I needed support in all those areas, but I just wish if looking back, if they would have got to the root of the problem, right? If endometriosis would have been diagnosed for me, even at the age of 15 and 16, right? Not in my third, when I got to 30, by then I'd had 2 children, my body, my career, my world. I know we focus a lot on the physical pain, but my mental health, right? My mental health had been pretty broken down, right? And even as a psychologist, you're going through the programs, the doctorate, all of that. And people are like, oh, you've made it to the top. I'm like, hey, we still have our challenges as well, right? Like I was struggling to, maintain any type of normalcy, right? And then my mental health was just taking a huge, huge toll.
So how did this affect those around you, those that are close to you? Did they start to kind of come around and understand and try to walk through this with you?
That's a really good question, right? So let's talk about some people just now are getting a grasp, right? Some people are just now looking at my Instagram account and being like, oh, well, now that you're talking about it pretty openly and looks like people are following you. And it's like, now that I've kind of made it a business, they're like, okay, maybe you're onto something, right? But here's the deal. I didn't have a lot of support, right? Even from a young age, my mother was kind of like, hey, shut up and suck it up, right? So that's kind of what I got there. Then I got into college, I'm the boss of me, but then I had doctors that were basically telling me the same thing, like, hey, if you don't want to try this next birth control, I mean, I remember it was being like, if you don't want to try this, you just don't want to be better, right? So I'm like, okay. Then I had people in my community who didn't understand, right? I was just the girl that was always complaining about her period, and your boss is kind of like, that's weird because there's 20 other women in the office and they're still coming to work. But it's like, it's not a period pain. But for me, it was also, I had to learn what it was. I didn't know that it wasn't period pain, right? I didn't know all of that in the beginning. At the time I was married for 14 years. I've been divorced for about 8 or 9. And my ex-husband didn't get it, right? I was just the wife that wasn't into him. I didn't want to have sex. I didn't want to this. He didn't understand. It was like, I had to try to tell him like, what you're bringing to the table has nothing on these chainsaws going through my body, right? There's no, no cologne, no amount of sexy that's going to turn this off, right? So even at home, I didn't have that support, right? And then my children they were young children. I mean, almost like a victim, right? Now, my children now are very compassionate, tons of empathy for anyone dealing with a chronic illness because they walked my journey, right? I was the mom that couldn't always show up at the Valentine's party. Once again, like I said, I'd have neighbors come and take my kids to the neighborhood park, right? Which was only 4 doors down, but my body wouldn't allow me to do that. So as far as support, I really only have that community probably in the last, honestly, 5 years, 6 years. And some are still kind of coming around, right? People that have known me my entire life, they're just kind of like, oh, so you've got a diagnosis. Why aren't you better? Right? They're waiting for me to get better. They're waiting for me to stop talking about endometriosis. They're waiting for me to stop talking about the impact it has on my family, my finances, my mental health, my everything. And it's like, it is a part of my world right now. I'm not using it as a crutch. I think that's what sets me apart as far as my business and my coaching and just my mindset alone. Like, yes, endometriosis is the diagnosis that's been given to me, but I never claim it. I'm not the person like my endo, my asthma. It's like, okay, no, it is not mine, right? I'm not going to use it as a crown, but more as a stepping stool, right? Like, okay, this is my diagnosis, but for me, I turned my pain into passion, right? Like that was very painful for me. That is why I talk about it openly. Like we were talking, everything is an open book for me. Like that's why I do what I do, because I was on the other hand. I didn't have the support. I didn't have the community. I had the girlfriends that had periods, but they were kind of like, well, you're always griping about yours, right? And not to mention, which I should have said in the beginning when we were talking about, endometriosis, it's that cramping, and the bleeding and all that stuff outside of your cycle, right? It's not just the 1 week. Some people are like, oh, it's just 1 week, tough it out. Yeah. But if you've got 1 week of pain, times 4. So every single day you're in pain, every single day you're cramping, you're bleeding, you're nauseous, you've got the bloating, all of these things, like you start blaming your body, it's tough. And even when you have the support, I think sometimes, even though I have support now, sometimes people don't know how to support me. Right? They're just kind of like, well, what do you want me to do? You've been sick for years. They're like, I can bring you another casserole, but they're like, you got about a zillion food allergies, right? So it's like, they want to be helpful. And so you really do have to, community is huge, right? I could talk about community forever. You really have to find a community, find the people that are going to support you, but also meet them where they're at, right? Some people are only going to reach out when you've had another procedure, had another surgery, right? Some people are going to reach out, when it's convenient, or they see your post or they see something and they're like, oh yeah, I haven't reached out to what's her name. I wonder how she's doing, right? And then others just need more guidance on how to support you.
Calling all Spoonies. As a host of a chronic illness podcast, nothing lights up my day more than hearing from you, our incredible listeners. Whether it's a topic close to your heart that you want us to uncover, or you are keen to show your own journey as a guest on our show, your voice matters. Living with chronic illness can often feel isolating, but through the power of podcasting, we can come together as a community to uplift, educate, and inspire one another. Your stories, insights, and questions drive the conversations we have and the topics we explore. So if there's something on your mind, a story that you are just itching to share, or a guest you'd love to hear from, don't hesitate to reach out. Your voice is not only welcomed here, but celebrated. Let's continue to amplify the voices of those living with chronic illnesses and create a space where everyone feels heard, supported, and empowered. Together, we are stronger.
I think that's a really good point. And I'm trying to decide if I should move on to the next question or if we should just kind of circle around and keep right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that people need to understand that being a patient advocate is a crucial thing, and we need more of them everywhere. Right. There cannot be enough of it to support people and to spread awareness and information, because sometimes not all the information is there. Sometimes people are not meeting doctors that share everything or even understand everything.
Right, you're right. And even if your physician is knowledgeable, right? Because sometimes, we have questions, people come to me and they're like, hey, my OB is going to do my excision, OB-GYNs. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with your OB-GYN trying to step in, but you really need a specialist, right? Like endometriosis is so unique, right? It looks so different for everyone, right? My endo diagnosis looks way different than yours, what looks way different than anyone else's. And so even when your physicians are stepping up, you need that support system, right? And then the other big thing I've started to notice is sometimes when we think support system, we're like, you know what, I'm just going to hop in this Facebook group. There's 200,000 members. But here's the deal, right? If 200,000 people are in pain and suffering every day, nobody's having a good day, no one's having a win, right? As you open your news feed, back to back is like, oh, it's another shitty day. Oh, it's another bad day. Oh my God, and it's like, I understand that. But if everything in that community is negative, that's where I kind of have to like, okay, if for me to go to the next level, I'm going to have somebody in here having a wins. I need somebody to come on here and be like, I had 2 hours of no pain, right? Or, hey, you know what? This may not work for you, but I tried this and it got me some success. Check out this website. Or, hey, I listened to this podcast and it was really uplifting. But I think sometimes with the community, sometimes they're just drawn to the quickest one, the biggest one, or whoever's advertising, but you also have to protect your energy, right? So there's a balance with that community, because sometimes communities can be very uplifting and encouraging. And then sometimes a community can be literally draining your battery, right? And as a spoonie, I mean, the best analogy I have, right? It's like plugging up your iPhone at night, right? When that iPhone is plugged up and juiced up, you wake up in the morning, you have 100% battery, right? When you're a spoonie, it's kind of like you got that battery that's a little bit older. It doesn't charge all night and get to 100%. Yeah, maybe it's 62%, right? And if you wake up every morning with a 62% battery, and then you're surrounded by just chronic illness and negativity, that little 62% battery could be at 30% by 9 a.m., right? Not to mention you got to do your whole, I know for me, I've got the whole, routine I do in the morning, the meditation, the lemon water, like that takes a bunch of spoons just to do my, daily get up and go routine. So by noon, you could be at 2%, right? So then if your community is only negative, and I have nothing against voicing, your pain is real. I understand all of that, but there has to be some balance. Like sometimes you may need people in your support system that possibly don't have the diagnosis, but they're an advocate and they can help you when you're not strong. Like I'm a very strong person, but 2 years ago, I got re-exposed to mold. It knocked me on my butt, right? That strength and that passion and all that fun stuff you hear now, honey, I was on, literally almost died 2 years ago of mold exposure, right? With the, immune system that was fighting. So I needed people at that time outside of my support system that maybe didn't understand mold exposure, right? Now they did understand when they visited me in the ICU and I'm like, nearly dying, they got it. But I needed people to advocate for me that possibly didn't have the same diagnosis, but knew that I needed the support. And so I think we have to really be conscious of our community now, because I think right now it's just like community. And, I even run a Facebook group, right? And we can definitely add the link, but there has to be a balance to make sure that you're moving in the right direction.
Yes. And don't be afraid to break up with a support group or unfollow a platform.
Yes.
You are supposed to go into a support group and walk away feeling lifted and encouraged and loved. And if you go in there and you have the negative Nancy every single week that acts like the world is against her and all is going to be over. And I'm speaking from a little bit of experience there.
Right. We've all been there.
If you go into that, you watch the whole group walk away absolutely discouraged and thinking, why do I even come here? All that's happening is a lot of complaining. And yet there's a balance of the complaining and I'm sorry, this is what I'm going through. Can you help support me? But if that's all you're ever feeling, move on, find another one. It's okay. Right. It's just like breaking up with a doctor. It's okay.
It is, right? And you have to, that's where, to me, that's more self-love and self-care, right? Sometimes we think the self-care is getting our nails done, going out with the gals, getting a massage. Sometimes self-care is removing yourself from that negative, toxic group, right? Sometimes it is, unfollowing a couple of Instagram accounts because that energy is kind of messing with your energy, right? Sometimes it is maybe, humbling yourself and being like, dang, I've been doing this on my own and I'm getting nowhere. It is time for me to get some support, right? Like to me, that's where self-love and self-care comes in as a spoonie versus, some of these superficial things like, oh, I buy myself flowers every weekend. There's nothing wrong with that, but it takes more. It just takes a lot more.
Okay. So I think this is the perfect time to roll into the question. Roll into the question I want to ask you. If you could only keep 4 items in your spoonie toolkit, what would those 4 items be?
Ooh, this is a good one. 4 items. Definitely some people in my support system, right? I'd have to bring some of my support system along. I'd say also just my foundation and my mindset, because that's huge, right? When it, like I said, those near-death moments, literally, like those things can change you. So I'd say community, definitely. Yeah, my foundation, my mindset. Ooh, what are some other things? I'm sorry. I just need those supplements, baby. Like some of those things I just gotta have. My healing journey is still a journey, and there are certain supplements and things. And then there are some audibles, right? Some books. There are some resources that no matter where I'm at, I can go back to those and they just pick me up immediately. Like they just kind of remind me that I'm in the fight, and sometimes I need that boost. So those would be my top 4. Yes.
I think we need to add your top 4 to the show notes. So
Okay.
let's add in some of those favorite supplements and some books, and yeah, let's share with some people what it is to walk in your Spoonie toolkit.
Yes. Audibles that I'm loving right now is The Mountain Is You, and then Manifest Yourself, I believe it's called. I'd have to look. Let me double check. I'm loving them because they're kind of reminding me that sometimes I think we rely on our support system. And I think that, but sometimes we need the reminder that the power, we really do have the power within. We just sometimes need that reminder, right? We sometimes need to change up. Yes. So The Mountain Is You, and then Manifest Now. Those are my 2 that I love, right? I go back to those. Actually, the Manifest Now, there's towards the end of the Audible where it's just some affirmations. And I have to be honest, right? Sometimes you may wake up and you don't have the energy to do all the affirmations, right? I literally scroll. I've done it a couple days ago, scroll to the end, right where it starts knocking out those affirmations. And I just put it on, right? I just put it on repeat just to change the energy. The Mountain Is You was also an amazing resource for me. As far as supplements right now, I'm a practitioner, not yours till you sign on the dotted line, right? So these are just for educational purposes. My top supplements, Zyplement. It's something you can get at Amazon. I'm not a huge Amazon fan just because sometimes I feel like those supplements aren't real. I've learned that I've ordered some things on there and they weren't the real deal. So Zyplement is a supplement that I love. It's a great anti-inflammatory. There's another supplement that I find is kind of a weird name that I take. If you guys want to get it, definitely get in contact me and I can get you connected because I don't think you can get it on Amazon or anything like that. It's called AKBA. I know it's kind of a weird name. But when it comes to like kicking inflammation, like that's like my natural anti-inflammatory. So because of my journey, my healing journey, I've, all the narcotics, all the stuff that I took, trying to get better with endo, just, all the, Percocets, codeine, all that, my liver is like, we can't do it any longer. So that's like my natural ibuprofen. At this point, I'm honestly like allergic to NSAIDs. I can't take a leave. I can't take any of those things. But like if I'm having some issues, or for me, I also like to cycle sync and optimize my cycle. So there's the 2 weeks that your body is working on detoxification, 2 weeks that it's working on decreasing inflammation. So I bring that in a couple times a day. Another big thing for me as well are, cruciferous vegetables, right? And so not DIM doesn't work for everyone, but for my journey, it is very, very helpful. And then magnesium. Oh my goodness, right? I could talk about magnesium 24/7, but here's the deal. There's several different types of magnesium. One thing for me as a blood type B, we just need extra magnesium. And so I was just talking to my boyfriend. He's like, how'd you sleep? I'm like, oh, like a baby. Because I did my magnesium bath. And I'm like, some of you guys are just putting in a little teaspoon. Honey, I put in 3 big cups. I'm like, I'm being knocked out, right? But something about the magnesium is very calming for my body. Different types of magnesium can be really great for bowel health if you're struggling with like constipation. So yeah, like I said, supplements are helpful, and what works for me may not work for you. But remember, supplements are also, like they said, to supplement your healing journey, right? Just the same way that I may take DIM, you could just as easily eat cruciferous vegetables, right? Broccoli, cauliflower, different things like that, right? So there's different ways to get those nutrients in. And what I will say, even though I'm huge on supplements, right? I do take them. Sometimes you can bring in the right types of foods, right? Not every supplement has to be in pill form, right? Like I said, you could just as easily be eating pineapple or ginger or turmeric or whatever and getting those same anti-inflammatory benefits.
So I'm actually new to the world of DIM, and I've only been taking it since the beginning of May. Can you kind of tell our listeners what exactly that is and what we take it for?
Yeah. So DIM is really when you're dealing with estrogen, right? To help you clear the estrogen. That dirty estrogen kind of gets in there and starts to recirculate. That's when you hear the term like estrogen dominance, right? So for me, when I did the Dutch test, my estrogen was like, hey, baby, I'm here to stay and I'm going to just keep circulating. And I'm like, yeah, no, because when you keep circulating, then I'm constipated, then I'm super sassy, then my gut health is off, right? So the DIM really helps you to break it down. Once again, just because you have the endometriosis diagnosis, just because you have some of these symptoms, don't just run out and buy DIM, right? It doesn't work that way. You need to know exactly. That's why I'm a big proponent of the Dutch test. I do it with all my patients, right? You need to know exactly where your hormones are at, not just the levels, but how they're being processed and how they're being cleared, right? I mean, we think of all, when you hear estrogen dominance or when you think of all the bloating and the pain, you're just like, oh, I need a detox. Here's the deal, running out and getting those pills, potions, and lotions, right? I know they're helpful sometimes, but if your body isn't clearing them properly, then you're just going to throw yourself into a healing crisis. And so, I guess we're both taking DIM. For me personally, it helps with that estrogen clearance. It helps with the bloating. It just really helps balance. Just doing the supplements for me is better versus the foods weren't bringing in enough of that, that I needed. So I had to kind of step it up with the supplement.
Okay, so my next question for you, if you could create a guidebook for newly diagnosed warriors, what would be the first thing you'd add to your Spoonie 101 chapter?
The first thing, to actually know what the disease is, right? To get the chronic, to actually get the real chronic illness definition, like the long one that I gave you, right? And debunking the misconceptions, right? Because if you can get that information when you start your journey, then it makes it easier for pain management. It makes it easier when you're finding a nutritionist or finding someone to work with, right? But I think so many of us don't have the proper definition. We don't understand that it's chronic inflammation throughout the entire body. So, when you're having the nosebleeds, when you're having all these things around your cycle, you're just kind of like, oh, yeah, I have a nosebleed. I probably need to go to my PCP, or, oh, I'll go to, my ear, nose, and throat doctor. And it's having that knowledge that this is something that affects your entire body. So once you have that knowledge, when you go into your doctor and they're kind of siloing your acne from your gut health, from your cramps, they're trying to put you, sending you to 15, because that's what happened to me. My acne, dermatologist, back pain, pain management. Oh, your skin's acting up, dermatologist. Oh, your gut's acting up, gastroenterologist. Oh, I had the bladder pain. Oh, you probably need to go to urologist. And I was going to all of them and they were helpful. But if I would have known in the beginning that they were all tied together, I would have had my doctors. I'm like, I could talk about this one forever, right? I would have had my doctors talk to each other, right? Everyone was kind of doing their own thing. I remember one time I was put on a prescription. I went to the other doctor and they're like, hold it, you can't take these and these. And I'm like, finally someone kind of looked and was like, are they even talking to each other? Like everyone was putting their little Band-Aid on the situation. So that first chapter would be really understanding the disease and the dynamic it can have on your entire body. Because once you're equipped with that information, it will better help you get care.
I could not agree with you more on this one because, well, it goes back to the 13 medications, right?
Right.
Sometimes you don't need to be on 13 medications and your doctors will just speak with each other and come up with a plan together on how to help everything. So we're not creating more problems to fix.
And unfortunately that happens, right? And that once again, I think it's challenging, right? Because like I said, the diagnosis may look different for other people. I had the diagnosis, had no fertility issues. Some people honestly have silent endo, right? I mean, no pain, no myrcene periods, no nothing. And then they have a fertility issue and find out there's all this endometriosis, right? So it's finding that individualized care is important as well.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I had this awkward moment of rolling into the next question. I'm going to have to edit that out.
You're good.
If scientists decided to rename your diagnosis, what title would you suggest and what words would you drop or keep?
Ooh. Renaming endometriosis. I think that's probably, we'd stick with that name. And then what would I drop? The first thing I would drop is the period pain. Because if we can get rid of that, it will open our eyes up, right? It's just, if you're like, oh, it's a bad period. Oh, it's just that and the other. I think that is the biggest issue. And that's why birth control and hormonal contraceptives and things are sprinkled on or layered on as the biggest Band-Aid, because they just still think it's a menstrual disease, right? They still feel like it's a reproductive disease and it's anything but that. And so that'd be my go-to. So yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me and see if we can make those changes, let's do it. Because I think that's where we need to start.
Well, and I think this is the perfect time to roll into this question. What is one stigma, myth, or misunderstanding that you would like to set straight?
Aside from it's not period pain, the other big thing would be, if you have a hysterectomy, it's going to cure your endo, right? And so, like I said, let's go back to the circle and back, louder for the people in the back, right? Endometriosis is uterine-like tissue found outside of the uterus, right? So I just want you to work with me here. So if it's outside of the uterus, and we pull your uterus, I'm going to drop the mic right there, right? Like it's just not, it may help with quality of life, right? It may help with, chronic bleeding, anemia, different things like that. But the hysterectomy is not going to cure your endo. And over 70% of the people I work with have had hysterectomies and they still have chronic pelvic pain. They still have bleeding. I mean, I have people with no uterus, no ovaries, and they're still bleeding. Go ahead and, tell me how that's working, right? Like there's still something going on there. And so that is the biggest misconception. And I always say this, I'm not coming from the high horse. So this is what I learned in school and talking down to you. I'm coming from the low horse, the been there, done that horse, right? Like, cause I scheduled a hysterectomy because I believed the lie. And then I started to educate myself and be like, okay, this isn't going to help me. And I went ahead and opted out of it. But while waiting on my surgery, that's where a lot of my programming and my growth came from, because I had to find my own quality of life. Like I knew if having a hysterectomy, I was going to be out of work for a while. I was a single parent. So I had to find some pain relief between, then and the surgery day. And that's where my journey really turned around. But yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. People are just like, okay, I'm tired of the bleeding. I'm tired of the symptoms, yank it out. And then it's so discouraging. People are heartbroken, right? When they're still having the same issues, right? And so, yeah, that's a big one. Huge, huge, huge misconception.
Yes. And, not to just talk about myself or anything, but I'm 42 years old. And at the age of 28, I was married to my second husband, which I'm still married to, but we were only married for 3 years. I was constantly having issues. I'd already had kidney stones several times that had to have emergency surgeries to remove. Well, we ended up in the emergency room 2 more times with pains that we thought maybe had something to do with kidney stones again. And that's when they found out about the endometriosis. And they had me convinced that if they did a hysterectomy, my life would be solved.
Right.
So at 28, we had all these forms we had to fill out saying that we were okay with not being able to have another child, even though my husband was already fixed. So we already weren't planning on it anyway. And the surgery happened and I was still having issues. And they insisted on leaving an ovary because they wanted me to have the estrogen and all that. And
right.
That one ended up having more issues. And it was a few years later that something happened and it got twisted and engorged and it was about to burst. And I had to have an emergency surgery to remove it. And so it was like constant issues, but
right.
They make it sound like, okay, but if I do this, it's a magic fix. Your world will be grand.
And that's how it was sold to me as well, right? And I did medically induced menopause. So I did Lupron and it was the same thing, right? You know what? This is a period issue. Let's shut your period off. You'll be better. Okay. We threw me into medically induced menopause. My pain, my bleed, everything for me was actually exasperated, right? Not to mention, I went in for the 3-month injection. They accidentally gave me the 6-month. Then to make it even more complicated, my body held on to that crap for 2.5 years. So I was in medically induced menopause for 2.5 years, joint pain, weight gain. One of my most humbling moments, I signed a form to send my child on a permission slip for a form, literally with so much brain fog, forgot I signed it, right? The day that my kid didn't come home from school, me, I'm like, Black mama, I'm going to call up there and set it straight, honey, only to be reminded that I had signed the form and sent him on a trip, right? Like what I'm telling you, like, the most humbling, you're like, okay, now people really think I'm crazy. I think I'm crazy at this moment, but it was so ridiculous. Like menopause for me was horrible and it was medically induced, right? So it was like, May 1st, you're good. May 15th, you're like a whole nother person, right? And it's still to this day is when I say people are like, what is the one thing you could redo? That is the one thing out of everything I've done in my world. I wish I could redo that because even to this day, 12, 13 years later, I am still paying the price from being on Lupron and medically induced menopause, right? There's still things to this day that I have to manage, the hypothyroid, making sure my bone health, all of these osteoporosis, all of these other things because of that one misconception that, hey, we turn off your period, we yank out your lady parts, you're going to be good to go. And it was anything but that for me.
And how long ago was that?
So that happened about 12, 13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm 43 now and still paying the price. And so that's the one thing I'm so passionate about. I know that Lupron has been life-changing for some, but for a lot of us, I think we need to speak out because it was the worst thing I could have done for my situation. It didn't help me in any way. There was no pain relief, and it really aged my body. And that was the one thing I wish I would have known about, that, going into menopause, they kind of are like, oh, you'll bounce back. No, I went back into my career, doing plyometrics, traveling the world, doing all these things. Because I'm thinking I'm 30 something, my body was still like 60 something, and just injuries and, surgeries and just all of these things because my body had literally aged. Even now I have gut issues. I've had bowel issues where my bowel has popped out and different things like that. And my doctor is always like, it's just crazy. But he's like, we have to remember that your body's been through menopause. So some of the things, these anomalies that I deal with now are because my body was aged, and then, it didn't come all the way back.
So what does your doctor have to say after all that happened?
Concerning the Lupron?
Mm-hmm.
What can they say, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for everyone. Well, that's weird because I'm talking to a lot of people and it's not working for a lot of people, and it's like, don't get me started on the kickbacks that these doctors receive when they're prescribing it and all these other things, right? Like, I think it's because of that one thing. If we could get the period pain taken off, then it would open our eyes to the fact that the hormones, their hormones play a role, but we need to remove the period pain stigma.
And that would absolutely help take it more seriously.
Right.
Ugh. If I asked you to nominate a fellow Spoonie warrior for highlights, who would it be and why?
Who would it be? I would nominate Jessica, Endo Sisters. Hopefully we can maybe tag her as well. Yeah. She has been super inspirational to me. And even when I moved here, right? So I was in Denver for about 21 years. And it's so funny, my community, which is why I'm all about community. I know some people are like, well, you just told us to drop our community. I said to drop some of the negativity. Mm-hmm. Jessica is literally one of my Instagram friends that I met in person. She was literally the first person I met in person when I moved to Arizona, has been super supportive. Like, sometimes you just need someone that gets it, right? You want to vent, but you don't want to vent to you got to kind of vent to the right people. And she's been there, done that, right? Like, she speaks from experience. Our journeys, we may have the same diagnosis, but our journeys look so different. And so, yeah, I would nominate my girl, Jessica.
All right. We are definitely going to put her in the show notes and give her a big old shout out.
Yes.
Okay. What would you tell your younger self about your current self?
To not give up. Because there were just so many times where I was just so broken, support system or not. Like, I felt like there was something wrong with me, no matter what the diagnosis, no matter what they told me, okay, yes, we figured out this about your bowel. Yes, we figured this out. I always was just like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I dealing with all of this? Like, is there something I've done? And yes, I made it to the other side. And that's something that's huge as I, work with my patients to advocate and, trying to restore that faith in them. But I would tell my younger self to just not give up, because there were so many times where, I'd go to an appointment and sit in my Tahoe and just cry my eyes out, right? Bawl my eyes out, because I just didn't know what else to do. And I felt like I was doing all the right things and not getting any results.
If you had to make yourself a promise right now about anything with your journey, or even just something outside of that, what would it be?
A promise?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm living my promise right now to raise awareness, right? Like, I will never, ever, ever, I could be 90 years old and people are like, oh my gosh, she's still talking about that. Yeah, honey, I am still talking about it, right? Like, I'm still going to be on that high horse, on that bus, on that mountain, because it has affected so much of my world. And I think the more awareness we spread, think of that person that's maybe never heard of endometriosis that's listening to this right now. And they're like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. There's definitely something going on. That empowers them to get their life back, right? It's about quality of life. It looks so different for each of us, but that would be my promise, to just keep doing what I'm doing. Like, it has to be done, especially for the brown and Black community. There's just a lot of disparities there, and we don't know what we don't know. And someone's got to speak up and someone's got to say something.
And why not you?
I'll take it. I'll carry that cross. Absolutely.
Is there anything I have not asked or we haven't brought up that you think is important to let the listeners hear?
The only other thing I would add is, despite what's going on with your body, despite your diagnosis, realize that your diagnosis does not define you and that you can have quality of life. It just may look different, right? My quality of life may be working out every day and doing this, that, and the other. Your quality of life may be spending time with your family, right? Being able to take your 2-year-old to the park, being able to have children, right? Just remembering that despite your diagnosis, you can have that quality of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why not fight for every bit of it that you can get?
Right.
All right. Where can we find and follow you?
Yes. The best place would be to follow me on Instagram, right? I'm on Instagram. We'll put the link for that. I've got a free Facebook group if you guys want to join in and get some community love as you manage not only endometriosis, but PCOS and fibroids. I'm on Pinterest. We'll add all the fun stuff, right? I'm all over. And if you guys want to do a free discovery call, if you're like, hey, I'm wanting to get in the driver's seat of my health, I'm dealing with endo. I want more natural options, right? I mean, been there, done that, tried the pharmaceuticals. You're ready for something different. Definitely will include the link and we can hop on a discovery call and see how I can support you.
That's wonderful. And I mean, do your research. You can find her all over the place and with lives, with everything. I mean, that's how I found you, with a live that you did with somebody.
Yes.
And just, keep looking. You will find her. You will find also a lot of other amazing people. Thank you for joining. And listeners, we are so glad you were here. Have a wonderful day. And don't forget your spoon.
The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. The information should not be taken as a replacement for medical, clinical, professional advice, diagnoses, or medical intervention. My Spoonie Sisters and guests will not be held liable for any of the consequences of such action or inaction. Trigger warning. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics including, but not limited to, suicide, abuse, mental illness, and chronic disease. You are advised to refrain from listening if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. None of the guests or hosts will be responsible for your use of the information contained therein. Life is not merely to be alive, but to be well. Living a life with a chronic illness is best described with one word: unpredictable. Be Well's products are designed to make the unpredictable easier to deal with. Back when I was getting my infusions, I would have loved to have their adult zip hoodie. They even have one in pink. They also have everything from one-day pill holders to urgency buckets. So remember, they want to make your life a little easier. So be sure to check out Be Well.